Hey guys, how's it going? And welcome back to another episode. In today's episode, we're going to be talking about the cultural invasion of Mexico, the foreigner invasion of Mexico. The reality is that, for a lot of people out there, well, there's a lot of misconceptions as to what's really going on and, what the Mexican people actually think about the situation and so on and so forth. So, as you guys already know, gentrification is the hot topic. It is the word that is a naughty word, for a lot of people out there. But I feel like there's just a lot of misconceptions as to what it really means and how people really feel about it. Because the reality is that, again, if you just look at the actual definition of gentrification, what it means is that, well, an area that is, deemed as poor or undesirable is now all of a sudden not poor and very desirable. And so, of course, there are situations in which gentrification, goes off the rails and it gets out of hand. But for the most part, as Mexico is growing, as the economy is getting better, as everyone in Mexico is getting richer and there are more opportunities and things, again, are just getting better and better each and every day for the typical Mexican, well, how do they feel about gentrification? Well, the reality is that if you ask the typical Mexican, in fact, you don't even have to ask them. You can just see them on a daily basis as, how they live their actual lives. And you get to see right off the bat that, well, they're enjoying it. They're very happy. And, they want more and more of this growth that is basically taking over the whole country. In fact, when I was recently in the pueblo of Ixil, and I was talking to some of the locals there, they were all asking me who I was and what I was doing with my videos. And basically, as soon as I told them what I did and who I was, they were all very happy and they were like, oh, really? That is awesome. Are you going to be able to bring more tourism out here? Are you going to be able to bring more opportunity out here by, again, telling everyone about our little pueblo or little village, this amazing place, this amazing area that is here in the Yucatan that is not too far away from the actual city. And so for the most part, most of the locals, in fact, all of the locals I was talking to, they were very happy and they were, again, very excited as, I was there to tell the world about the magical place of Ixil. And not just that village, but many villages, many areas, not just villages. But again, you can even just go to regular neighborhoods, and most regular, working class neighborhoods, they're also very happy that now all of a sudden they get, a fancier, more modern grocery store or better roads or better services, more beautiful parks and recreational areas and so on and so forth. So again, the typical Mexican is actually very happy and very excited about all this growth because they're finally saying to themselves, wow, our turn has finally come. We don't have to move to the USA anymore. We don't have to go to Europe or fantasize about other countries and what life could be and the whole American dream, chasing that and going elsewhere for that. When now all of a sudden, all of these things are here in my backyard. Now I can actually, walk around my neighborhood and things are safer. Now I can actually go to a park that I am proud of. I can go to the mall and enjoy all the things that, well, before I could only really just go to the USA or Canada to enjoy a lot of these things. But in today's modern Mexico, all of these things are right here and I get to enjoy them and I don't have to leave my country. And now I get to make more money here in Mexico. And now, again, I get to afford these things. I get to give my children, my family a better lifestyle. So, of course, there are going to be certain areas of Mexico, like, in Mexico City or even here in Merida, or again, pick your city in Mexico in which, well, things have, basically been overrun by gringos, by expats, by foreigners. And in some cases, the locals are happy with it, and sometimes they're not happy with it. It really all depends on the people that are moving there and their attitudes towards the country itself. A lot of the time, the foreigners are actually embraced by the local people because, well, it brings a lot of cultural exchange. One of the things that I was really surprised of, when I first moved to Mexico was how much they love American culture. A lot of them, were actually really, really excited by the fact that, well, I was American. Even though I spoke Spanish, I'm Cuban, and all that stuff, they were actually more excited to hear that I was American and that I loved American things. And I listened to rock and roll. I watched American football, and I ate things like hamburgers and pizza and all that stuff, believe it or not. And so to me, I was just like, really? You guys are actually excited and think it's cool that I like the Miami Dolphins, or that I watch NFL football or NBA, or again, whatever American cultural thing that was just part of my everyday life. I thought that people out here were probably not going to like it or even find it exciting at all, but they actually really enjoyed it. In fact, I'm a big rock and roll fan, and back in the USA, well, rock is dead. I'm sure you've heard that term multiple times, but out here in Mexico, it is anything but dead. In fact, Christian's cousin, her husband, is in a big metal band. And so, and I know many people and many friends of mine that not only play, rock and roll and are in a band themselves, but they love to listen to that music. And again, it could be like an old Mexican and they're listening to like Led Zeppelin, Black Sabbath, you name it, Depeche Mode, and they love it. They might not understand all of the words and the lyrics, but they love the music. And so obviously, as time has gone on and the USA has produced less and less of that music, well, now they produce that music. In fact, that whole idea of rock and roll is actually alive and well in many parts of the world, including Mexico. So Mexico has like their own version, the Latin version of rock and roll. They got their own bands, their own music, pop music, you name it. And it's all heavily influenced by, what the USA, laid the groundwork for. So they love, just music, and not just music, but, even like something like NFL football is, again, alive and well. I was surprised to see that in one of the local parks out here where I live, they actually have goalposts, the same exact goalposts that they have, in the USA in a regular American football field. In fact, they love baseball as well. These two things that are American pastimes. Sure, they play soccer, but I'm not going to lie to you. I've only seen, a little bit of soccer. I've seen more baseball, and I've seen, other sports that are more, again, American out here in Mexico, like rodeos and so on and so forth, than anything else. In fact, one can even argue, with certain things like the rodeo, that is not necessarily a USA thing or a Mexican thing, but an American thing. And so that's another thing too. I realized that, when I talk to a lot of Mexicans out here, they actually were bothered sometimes, when an American calls themselves an American. Bruh. Because they themselves consider themselves American. In fact, when they are out here in school, there is no such thing as North America, Central America, and South America. No, it's all America. And so they consider themselves American. They just, again, obviously they're Mexican because this is where they're from, but they look at, someone from Canada as a Canadian. They consider someone from the United States as a estadounidense, which basically means, a United States-er. Huh? By the way, I don't even know how to say that in English, or what would be the proper term. I, again, consider myself an American because that's where I'm from. But I digress. The point I'm trying to make here is the fact that they consider themselves American. In fact, a lot of them even say that half of the USA is actually Mexican. And well, they're not wrong. Again, you can just look at the history and you can just go back a little bit and you can see that, Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, California, all of these places were part of Mexico at one time. And in fact, if you are from those areas or you even live in those areas, you know that it's really Mexican. And obviously, the closer you are to the US-Mexico border, well, the lines just blur because there's a lot of similarities between, again, the American Southwest and the Mexican North. I happen to live all the way down south in the Yucatan Peninsula, which is actually a lot more similar to Guatemala than it is to northern Mexico. But even all the way out here, all the way on the southern tip of Mexico, it is very American. They love a lot of the same things that you guys love in the USA. Everything from hamburgers and pizza and hot wings, boneless hot wings, to be exact. But even things like, Netflix, sports, music, and so many other influences that you would never even think of when moving out here. And so, there's a term that a lot of people like to throw around these days, which is that cultural appropriation thing. And I myself, I'm not a fan of that, because I really prefer to say something like a fusion. Because, this is something we could talk about, for hours on end. But the reality is that, the whole idea of, again, even cultural appropriation is, a bit of a misnomer, because it's more of a fusion. So, like, for example, an Italian that would visit the USA could simply say, hey, you guys are culturally appropriating my pizza. Or a French person could be saying, hey, you're culturally appropriating my croissant. And I can go on and on. Same thing with Mexican food and Mexican culture. You guys know, living in the USA, in many parts of the USA, there's a lot of Mexican culture, Mexican customs, Mexican food that we enjoy in the USA. Well, guess what? It goes the other way around as well. So out here in Mexico, not only is there a big, fusion and, again, cultural exchange with the USA, but with other countries as well. Again, there's a huge, Lebanese and a huge Middle Eastern influence out here in Mexico. There's a huge European influence in Mexico. Everything from, Spanish influence that you can see everywhere, like in architecture, the religion, and other things. But also, again, there's French influence, there's Italian influence, there's German influence, so for example, a lot of the traditional Mexican country music, well, it's very heavily influenced by German polka. A lot of people just also don't understand that, Mexico, again, being the neighbor of the USA, has a lot of similarities when it comes to all the immigrants that came to Mexico, and they, and they shared their culture with the country and its people. And that has not changed. As the USA is constantly changing culturally, with all the immigrants that are coming and all the influences from around the world that, make their way to the USA, and then the USA makes it its own, and then it spreads it all over the world. Well, Mexico has a similar situation like that. In fact, there's a lot of immigrants in Mexico. I don't know the exact number, but it's, pretty close second to the USA. So, just going back to like some of the Middle Eastern influence, some of the most famous tacos in Mexico are tacos al pastor. And basically, it's just like a giant Mexican shawarma. That's all it is. So again, if you know anything about, shawarma, gyros, that kind of, food from that part of the world, well, Mexican has their own version of that. And people all over the world love it. So the reality is that it's just a cultural fusion that is just constantly growing. So as all of these foreigners continue to make their way to Mexico and they bring their culture with them, and some of them obviously refuse to change their ways and change their culture, well, believe it or not, a lot of the Mexicans, actually appreciate that. Now, again, it doesn't mean that you got to abandon your culture or hide your cultural norms or anything like that. In fact, it is greatly appreciated that you are bringing your own culture, your own food, your own ways of life out here and sharing it with everybody. In fact, a lot of Mexicans are actually curious, and they love the fact that, you are bringing your own culture, that you want to live out here in Mexico. They want to share their culture with you, and they want you to share your culture with them. So you guys have seen already on my channel, where, I interviewed Sophie from, Zinc Restaurant, and she's bringing her French culture, her French food out here, and the locals are loving it. There are many people that are moving out here from Korea, from Japan, from other parts of Europe, from other parts of Latin America, from the USA, and I could go on, and they're bringing their way of life, they're bringing their culture out here, and they're doing a lot of, again, cultural exchange, a huge fusion of things. So, for example, just like when the Chinese, went to the USA once upon a time, and they didn't really, bring their Chinese food to the American people because they were afraid that, a typical American wasn't going to like it. So they, created their own version, an Americanized version of Chinese food, and they presented that to the USA, and well, the people loved it. The Americans loved it. Eventually, the Chinese people, just like a lot of other cultures, they just decided to, actually bring the authentic Chinese food with them. And well, now in today's world, we have two different versions of that. We got, the authentic Chinese food that comes straight from China. And then we have the American Chinese food, that is basically, what we all know as, Chinese food, but it's American Chinese food. And so out here, when you go to a Chinese restaurant, out here in this part of Mexico, you're going to find that the Chinese food is going to be Americanized Chinese food with a Mexican twist. But in other parts of Mexico, well, the Chinese people, they just brought their food, brought their culture. They never really changed much. And, you get to have real authentic Chinese food. And again, not just Chinese food, but that goes along the lines with so many other, cultures that have come out here and, throughout the years. So what's going on right now in Mexico is just that things are in hyperdrive. Well, because many countries around the world, they're going through a lot of their own struggles and their own situations, and they're creating a lot of immigrants, people like you and me, that come from the USA. We are now immigrants in Mexico. We are foreigners that live out here in Mexico. And so therefore, as more and more of us are coming, we're bringing even more and more of our culture. So for example, where, just a few years ago, you would never in a million years find authentic American barbecue out here in this part of Mexico or this part of the world. Well, now you see it. And why do you see it? Well, because Americans are coming out here, they're bringing, the food that they love, and they're, again, presenting it to the Mexicans. And now Mexicans are having real barbecue for the first time, and they're like, wow, this is amazing. And the same thing goes with, again, Asian food. People love sushi out here. But just like in the USA, people are going to have their California rolls, which is not real sushi. Same thing out here. They're going to have their versions, of Mexican sushi, which, again, if a real Japanese person were to see, they would roll around in their grave and they're not even dead yet. Bruh. But with that being said, we're seeing more and more of that, and we're seeing, again, Mexicans that are embracing this culture that's coming from abroad, and it doesn't matter where it's coming from. They're loving it. They love Korean food. They love Chinese food. They love American food. Things that are outside of the normal, hamburgers and hot dogs and pizza. Same thing with Chinese food. If all of a sudden now a real Chinese restaurant opens up that's, again, outside of the, just Americanized Chinese food, they're going to love it. Same thing with French food. Same thing with whatever. And I know I keep harping on food, but food is usually what leads the way when it comes to these cultural exchanges that happen throughout the world. And it's nothing new. This is as old as time itself. Like, one of the cultural things that they have out here in Mexico, which is new to a lot of foreigners, is the fact that they love everything spicy. I mean, literally, you go to the candy aisle and 90% of the candies, I know I'm exaggerating, but still, a lot of the candy out here has some sort of spicy on it. And I remember, when I first got here, I'm like, why do the sweets have spicy on it, have something sour and spicy attached to the candy? It doesn't always make sense. But hey, at the end of the day, when in Rome, you just give it a shot, and well, you might like it or you might not like it. Some people love the fact that everything in Mexico is spicy and sour from, again, a lot of lime juice and things like that, a lot of acid, in their food. But some people don't like that. And guess what? There's a lot of Mexicans that don't like it either. So now when you are bringing your own flavors, your own culture, your own differences to the palate of the typical Mexican, they're like, oh, you know what? I actually like sushi. I actually like to eat, real authentic Italian food, and so on and so forth. So, of course, when you're moving to Mexico, the one thing that you have to keep in mind is the fact that, well, you're in a different country and they have different cultural norms and different cultural differences that might not be for everyone. So, same thing as if you're moving to the USA. So, for example, one thing that I talk about a lot is the fact that when you're moving to Mexico, you got to just, again, embrace the fact that, things are really free. Freedom. The freedom is heavily emphasized on a day-to-day life basis. And what do I mean by that? Well, you already know the fact that, rules of law, are just a suggestion more than anything else. Cops, authority, things like that, they're not as powerful as they are in the USA. And again, it's really more like a free-for-all out here. And so that's why you got to start getting along with your neighbors, have more of a conversation with strangers and so on and so forth. So you can all, basically get along. As opposed to where you come from in the USA or Canada, where you might not even talk to your neighbor and you do things more on a passive-aggressive style in order to just deal with your, problems that you might have with your neighbor. Or you might, like the fact that you can call the police and call the cops on anything and everything, and the fact that there's a million rules and regulations, and that, again, you can just get in trouble and arrested for simply driving without a license, as opposed to Mexico, where you might just get a ticket. So again, a typical Mexican, they are actually very happy, with all this growth, all this gentrification, all these foreigners that are coming in and they're bringing their culture, their way of life, all this cultural exchange, the fact that now Mexico is looked upon more and more favorably on a world stage, because of their culture, their food, the way of life, how beautiful everything is out here in Mexico. So they expect you, when you move out here to Mexico, for you to embrace their way of life. And of course, it's not going to be exactly the same like where you're from. And so therefore, they're expecting you to, again, adhere to their way of life, to embrace their culture and their way of life. Because obviously, why would you be moving here if you don't want to live like Mexicans live? And the problem really starts when you, as a foreigner, come out here and you try to change things so that they are, again, more closely related to what you're used to in your own country. So it's more about that. It's like when you are coming out here to Mexico and you are imposing your own ways out here, when you all of a sudden now, are acting like a colonizer, by simply saying, hey, you know what? I want to do things this way. Hey, I want the laws to change in that direction. I want things to basically revolve around me like they do in my own home country. That's when the problems start. That's what a lot of the local Mexicans don't like, and they're not going to appreciate. And they're not going to allow you to do any of those things, because guess what? Mexico is a very proud country, proud culture, and they have their way of doing things, and it's either their way or the highway. Because again, just think about the absurdity of, again, a foreigner coming into the USA and, again, not adhering to the laws, doing whatever they want, living however they want, not embracing, American culture in any way whatsoever. Well, it doesn't, end well with a lot of the locals that live there. And so it's kind of like the same thing. Now, it's not to say that it doesn't happen. Of course, we know that there's pockets in the USA of people that live in their own little bubble. They come from wherever country they come from, and they just continue to live in that little bubble and eventually keep building and growing that community until, they are their own thing, living within the borders of the USA. Again, I'm a Cuban from Miami, and if you go to Miami, you already know that Miami is nothing like the rest of the country. And again, there are many pockets, all over the USA, full of immigrants that refuse to embrace American culture. Same thing is happening out here in Mexico. And, those people, again, not every Mexican is taking a liking to them. But it's not really the norm. The reality is that a lot of immigrants and foreigners that are moving out here are actually embracing the culture. They're assimilating very well. And the ones that don't, they end up going back home. Or they end up in these enclaves, of other expats, other gringos, whatever it is. And, again, they just stick in their little bubble, and they stay in their bubble, and they don't go outside of that bubble. And well, the Mexicans, they know that that's a certain gringo or foreigner bubble, and they only go in that bubble if they want to experience that culture and that way of life. But that's the thing, it's few and far in between. You're not going to really see that all over the place. And then again, many places around Mexico, let's just talk about Mexico City for 1 second, and the same thing as you see in Merida and other places where, there are certain areas that, again, they were rich at one time. They were full of tourists and so on and so forth, and a certain, again, income demographic. And now all of a sudden, a lot of Americans, foreigners, are moving to these areas. And well, a lot of the locals, believe it or not, are embracing it. I know what you thought I was going to say. You thought I was going to say that a lot of these Mexicans are not liking it. Well, we know that there's a lot of Mexicans that are not liking the fact that they're probably being priced out. Especially, think about it, if you're a rich Mexican living in a rich area and now a richer foreigner is basically pushing you out.
Bruh.
So, of course, they're not going to like that. But again, if you look at a lot of the business owners or the ones that can actually take advantage of the situation financially, they're loving it. They're loving this huge influx of foreigners and influx of money that's coming in. And I know a lot of Mexicans, are also hating the fact that, hey, now certain places, they have signs that are in English and certain things that are in other languages besides English. But again, the ones that are putting up those signs are happy because now they have an even larger customer base, not just the locals, but again, all these other people. And again, not every Mexican is poor, okay, or middle class. There's a lot of Mexicans that are, again, upper middle class and higher, and they love the fact that Mexico is now becoming a destination for rich foreigners. And even just a regular middle class Mexican citizen, well, now they get to drive a Tesla if they can afford it. Now they get to embrace going to a fancy restaurant and go to these fancy places that they might have not been able to go to in the past. Not because they couldn't afford it, no, simply because they weren't there to begin with. And now they're popping up everywhere. So a lot of Mexicans are very happy. They're very proud of this stuff. And, a lot of them are, able to take advantage of it financially. Now, again, there's always going to be bitter people or people that are upset, about the growth. But again, if you ask a typical Mexican or anyone else around the world that's experiencing any kind of growth in their own communities, most of them are going to be very, very happy about it. And that's just the fact. Usually a lot of the people that are not happy about it are, again, people that don't want to change their ways. They want things to remain a certain way. And again, it really more about them than it is about the community and the people around them. So with all that being said, again, the reality is that most of Mexico does not want gringos to leave or foreigners to leave. In fact, they're embracing all of these gringos, foreigners, expats, immigrants, whatever you want to call it, because again, they are enjoying the fact that now Mexico is booming, it's growing, and not only do they as Mexicans want to stay in their own country, but they are also very happy and very proud that so many foreigners are actually coming out here and wanting to live out here and really, again, build a future out here. And now they are seeing an influx of foreigners coming from rich countries, or again, quote unquote, richer countries, or countries that used to be rich compared to them. But now, again, the tables are turning, and this is all part of that growth. And again, most Mexicans that are educated on the situation and what's really going on, well, they're extremely happy and they're embracing it with open arms. So as long as you are not out here trying to change Mexico in a bad way, as long as you're actually embracing Mexican culture, Mexican customs, Mexican's way of life, listen, they're going to love you. They're going to love everything about you, and they're going to love the fact that now you're bringing your culture and your way of life out here, and you are all now, culturally exchanging all kinds of awesomeness. So again, with all that being said, you got nothing to worry about. The reality is that You're going to love it out here in Mexico, especially if you embrace everything about what life in Mexico is all about. And of course, you're going to be bringing your own culture and your own customs and your own way of life. And the typical Mexican can't wait for you to share it with them, and vice versa. They can't wait to share their culture, their way of life with you. So with all that being said, I want to give a big shout out to all my patrons, all my members, every single one of you guys that helps contribute something to the show, whether you are simply watching the video all the way through, leaving a comment, watching an ad, leaving a like, sharing the video. All of it is extremely helpful, and I really appreciate it. And so does everyone else out there that's in the audience, especially if you're leaving a comment with your own 2 cents, because now you're providing your experience and your knowledge about living out in Mexico or coming to Mexico with everyone else. And everyone, well, now we have a cultural exchange in the comment section as well. So again, I want to just, again, super huge big shout out to everyone out there that's been supporting me throughout the years and supporting me now and in the future. And I really, really love and appreciate all of you guys so very much. So with all that being said, you already know the deal, guys. If you like this kind of content, don't forget to please like, please subscribe, please share, please hit the bell icon. But more importantly than anything else, please stay awesome. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you guys on the next one. Bye, guys.